My name is Quinn. I'm 28 years old and work as an emergency room nurse in a small desert town in New Mexico. That night, blood dripped from my nose onto my collar as my hand shook dialing 911. And my 13-year-old cousin, Ellie, was curled up in the corner of the kitchen, clutching a first aid kit no one ever taught her how to use. When the police knocked, my mother just smiled and welcomed them in like she was hosting a Christmas party. She fell. Probably drunk, she said. But Ellie had seen everything. Have you ever been denied by your own family, even as you were bleeding right in front of them? Have you ever stayed silent just to protect someone's reputation, only to grow up in shadows that weren't yours to carry? If you've ever been labeled too sensitive, just because you dared to speak up, leave a comment. Tap like if you believe silence shouldn't be passed down. And subscribe, because what I'm about to share is the reason I had to break everything wide open. I was born into a family people called Picture Perfect. A 2-story wooden house with a neatly trimmed lawn and flower baskets hanging from the porch. My father, Pastor Benjamin Harper, led Grace Hill Church for over 30 years. He stepped up to the pulpit with a warm, low voice, preaching forgiveness, love, and duty. My mother, Loretta, was the smiling woman who organized donation drives for orphans and local charities. And my younger brother, Derek, was the golden child, the chosen one, the heir, the future. I used to believe in that image. I thought if I tried just a little harder, behaved a little better, I might be loved like Derek was. But when I was 10, that belief was locked away, along with me, inside a basement under the house. That day, I only asked why my mother made me give Derek my birthday cake when she had just said it was my special day. "Don't be disrespectful," she snapped. "You're embarrassing your father in front of our guests." Before I could understand, her hand grabbed my wrist and dragged me down the stairs behind the laundry room. The basement door slammed shut behind me. No explanation. In the damp, musty dark, I sat shivering like a wet kitten, crying and banging on the door, but no one answered. Later, I found out she told everyone I went upstairs to rest. When I was 17, my father got sick. I stayed up monitoring his blood pressure, took him to appointments, picked up his medication, doing what my mother wouldn't. Derek was away at college out of state, yet still got called home for every holiday, greeted with big dinners and loud congratulations. One night after dinner, I asked if I could borrow the car for a scholarship interview. Derek stood up, gave a cold smirk, and whispered, "I'm the one who belongs here. Not you." Then he shoved me. I stumbled back, tripped on the rug, and fell down the wooden stairs. My head slammed into the railing and my shirt tore at the shoulder. When I opened my eyes, my mother was standing at the foot of the stairs, blank-faced. She told the doctor I had slipped because I was wearing house slippers. I still have a copy of the medical report. Impact to head, shoulder, and hip. No signs of serious injury. Patient reports accidental fall. I never said that. But when I spoke up, my mother just said, "Don't make it worse. People will think we're a broken family." The family photos on every wall were proof of the perfect story they had built. Derek beside Dad at graduation. Mom hugging Derek in the kitchen after he won a sports award. A summer fundraiser photo with the whole extended family, except me. I used to remember a Christmas photo clearly, me in a handmade green dress standing by the tree. But when I looked again, I realized I'd been cut out. The edge was jagged and rushed, like my presence was something shameful that needed erasing. I once skipped a whole week of school to take Mom to her thyroid appointments. I drove more than 60 miles a day, waited hours outside her chemo sessions, brought her ginger cookies and warm scarves she liked. I thought maybe then she'd see me differently, that I was part of this family too. But when she told friends at church, she said, "She's still difficult. Skipping school like always. God sure gave me a challenge with her." Maybe if it weren't for Ellie, I would have kept believing I was just imagining things. Ellie is the daughter of Meredith, my cousin who died in a car crash when Ellie was just 6. Meredith was the only one in our family who ever believed me. She once whispered during a family gathering when I was 16, "They're not fair to you." I see it. After Meredith passed, Ellie stayed with her dad for a while, then was sent to live with Loretta when her father took an overseas job. At first I thought Ellie would be loved. But she started shrinking in on herself, quieter, more skittish. I asked if she liked it here. She nodded but wouldn't look me in the eye. One night, I found her asleep at the table holding a half-finished homework sheet. I gently touched her shoulder. She flinched and blurted, I didn't mean to break the glass. I'll stay outside 10 more minutes. Don't lock the door again. I froze. In that moment, I heard my own voice at age 10. Shaky, apologizing for things I didn't do, terrified of something I couldn't name. I thought I had escaped. That going out into the world, saving lives, living on my own meant I was free. But Ellie made me realize that pain was still inside me. And if I stayed silent this time, I wouldn't just be losing myself. I'd be letting another child grow up in silence the way I did. That night it rained hard. Wind howled through the living room windows. I was folding laundry when I heard muffled noises from Ellie's room. At first I thought she was having a nightmare. But as I leaned closer, her whisper made my heart stop. Please don't lock me in again. I'll be good. Don't shut the door. My chest tightened. I knelt beside her bed and touched her forehead, damp with sweat. She was still asleep, lips moving with something I couldn't quite catch. I gently pulled the blanket over her, but in my mind, images surged back like crashing waves. The basement. The smell of rotten metal. The heavy door slamming shut. My cries echoing unanswered. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair by the window, the soft light stretching across the floor. Ellie didn't know it, but that tiny sentence pulled me right back into memories I had tried for years to bury. The next morning, I went to the electronics store near the hospital and bought 3 tiny hidden cameras, each no bigger than my fingertip. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. Maybe a sign. A sound. A reaction. Or proof. Something I never had when I was shoved down those stairs or locked in that room. I placed one camera in the corner of the dining room, one near the bookshelf in the living room, and the smallest one behind the teapot in the kitchen. I carefully adjusted each angle to keep them hidden, then left as if I'd never been there. A week passed. Nothing unusual. Ellie was still quiet, still afraid of Derek's glare, still avoiding my mother whenever she entered a room. I waited. Until Friday night. I had just gotten off my shift, exhausted, eating noodles in my apartment when my phone buzzed. Motion detected. The kitchen camera picked up elevated audio. I opened the app. My hand started to shake. The angle was tilted, but clear enough to see Derek looming over Ellie, hands pressed on the table, voice low and threatening. "You think you get to eat first?" he snarled, breath heavy. "Good kids know how to stay quiet." Ellie shrank near the fridge, lips trembling. I just got a piece of cake for Aunt Quinn." "Aunt Quinn doesn't live here," Derek said, and then suddenly slapped her. The sound hit me like a knife. "Want to get locked up like last time?" he barked, dragging her out of frame. The dining room camera caught him opening the pantry door at the end of the hallway. The heavy door creaked. Light spilled into Ellie's terrified face just before he shoved her in and slammed it shut. A moment later, the click of a lock turning. Then my mother entered the frame, slowly, holding a cup of tea, expressionless. "She needs discipline," she said calmly, like she was reading a recipe. "You had to learn too, remember?" "I remember," Derek said with a slight laugh and walked back to the living room. I couldn't breathe. My whole body tensed like a wire about to snap. I rewound the footage 3 times. Each time it squeezed my throat tighter. I'd been locked in that room. I knew that moldy metal smell, that cold that seeped into your bones, and the sound of a door you couldn't open from the inside. I'd sat just like Ellie, curled up, crying myself to sleep from hunger and fear. I didn't know how long I sat there staring at the screen. Maybe hours. Maybe all night. Every sound in that recording felt like another nail being hammered into a coffin I thought I had buried long ago. The next morning, I went to my mother's house with a fake smile and a pie I picked up from the morning market. I sat at the kitchen table trying to keep my voice light. "Ellie seems tired lately," I said, looking at my mother. She didn't look up. "That girl needs discipline. She's lazy." There was a night I heard her crying in her sleep. "Probably just dreaming," my mother said calmly, sipping her tea. I bit my lip until it bled but held on to the smile. I knew this wasn't the moment to confront her. I needed more. I needed everything to be clear. Because if I was going to break the silence, no one would ever again call me too sensitive. I returned to the hospital on a cloudy afternoon, the wind rustling through the rows of willow trees by the gate. My ID badge swayed on my neck as I walked through the glass doors. No scrubs, no shift, just a woman chasing down the broken pieces of her past. The medical records archive was tucked deep behind the administrative wing, a place staff rarely visited unless something specific was needed. I went straight to the counter, tapping gently on the glass top. The older woman behind it looked up, squinting at me through her chain-link glasses. "My name is Quinn Harper. I'm requesting copies of my medical records from 2009 to 2012, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You work here, right?" she asked. "Yes, sir, nurse, night shift. I know the procedure." I brought ID and the form already filled out. She nodded slowly, took the paperwork and glanced it over. "One moment, I'll check the system." I stood there, gripping my bag strap. The room was too quiet, only the clacking of keys and the low hum of the ceiling vents. Part of me was prepared to find nothing. But another part, one that still remembered the sharp pain in my shoulder after a so-called slippery fall, the blood that soaked through my sleeve while my mother called it a tiny scratch, that part couldn't let go. She searched the system for nearly 10 minutes, then frowned. "There are only 3 visits on record. A bike accident in 2009, an acute fever in 2010, and a knee sprain in 2012. Are you sure there's anything else?" I tightened my grip on the bag. I distinctly remember getting examined for shoulder and rib injuries. I was 17. "I still have the prescription." She shrugged and pointed to the screen. "There's no entry for that." I turned away, my shoulders heavy with disappointment. But just as I stepped out into the hallway, a familiar deep voice called my name. "Quinn." I turned. For Charles Benton, one of the first attending physicians I'd worked with, now head of the department. His hair was grayer, but his eyes were still sharp. "I overheard your name in records," he said, approaching. "You looking for something?" I glanced around. The hallway was empty. "It's personal. I'm trying to get my own medical files, but the system's missing something important." His expression shifted. He lowered his voice. "Come with me." I followed him quietly to a small office at the end of the hallway. On his cluttered desk was a stack of old case files wrapped in yellowing paper. He opened a drawer, pulled out a folder tied with a rubber band and handed it to me. "This isn't in the system anymore. But I kept a hard copy. I can't say how many other doctors did the same." My hands trembled as I removed the band. Inside was an X-ray of my shoulder. Another image showed a fracture on my 7th rib. A sticky note beside it read, "Fracture suspected, injury mechanism unclear. Suggested abuse, unreported." The last word, "unreported," had been crossed out in red ink. Someone had tried to erase it, but it was still there. The ink hadn't faded. I flipped through the rest. A diagnostic note read, "Patient reports fall on stairs." A handwritten comment said, "Patient unusually silent. Avoids eye contact with guardian." My throat tightened. The words blurred. "I don't remember exactly what I said," I whispered. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I lied. Benton sat down across from me. "Quinn, I suspected. You were a minor then, came in with your mother and brother. They were very controlling." I asked. "But later my superiors told me not to interfere with Pastor Harper's family. You know how much influence they had." I looked at him, voice low. "I think they're scrubbing everything. My past, and Ellie's too." He nodded slowly. "I believe you. And I think you should take everything in this file. Don't let anyone else touch it. It won't stay here long." I held the folder to my chest like I was hugging a piece of myself I'd lost. The afternoon wind stirred the papers. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew I wasn't leaving empty-handed. Back at my apartment, I felt cold and numb. The old medical file sat neatly on the kitchen table, beside a cup of tea I'd poured but never touched. Late sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the file's cover. I didn't know where to start. I just knew I was surrounded by pieces, and somehow, I had to put them together to understand what I had spent a lifetime being taught to forget. I retrieved Meredith's old suitcase from the attic where I had kept it like a relic. It was the same one she used to carry when visiting, dark brown leather, worn edges, and a faint musty smell. I still remembered the last time I saw it, at her funeral. I was only 14. Ellie, still wrapped in a pink shawl, looked lost in someone's arms. I had never dared to open it. Just stored it away, avoided eye contact with the past. But tonight, with wind howling through the window and hospital ink still lingering on the paper, I knew it was time. I gently unlatched the clasps. The hinges creaked dryly. Inside were a few faded photographs, a silver lipstick case, a handkerchief embroidered with Mary, and tucked at the bottom was a thin leather-bound journal, its corners worn and tied with a faded ribbon. I sat on the floor and opened the first page. Meredith's handwriting was still soft, slightly slanted to the left. The opening line read, "If I die, it wasn't an accident." I froze. My heart pounded as I flipped to the next page. In April that year, Meredith had written about a fight with Derek. "He slapped me so hard I nearly fell off the porch, while I was 8 months pregnant. My mom saw but just said, 'Don't make a scene. He's under pressure.'" The next page described another argument. "I was too scared to tell the doctor. They asked if I had fallen. I shook my head. No one pressed further. Because I was the pastor's wife, and Derek was their hope." Every sentence felt like a blade. The more I read, the harder it was to breathe. In July, Meredith wrote, "I know I'm not okay. But if I say it, they'll call me paranoid. I've seen it happen to Quinn. I've seen how they labeled her emotionally unstable. I'm afraid the same thing will happen to Ellie." And then the final page. No date. Just a single line. "If anything happens to me, don't leave the girl with them. Don't let Ellie become another version of me." I sat frozen, the notebook slipping onto my lap. My vision blurred, though I couldn't tell if it was from tears or the wave of dizziness crashing down. Meredith knew. She understood that the silence in this family wasn't an accident. It was a choice. A quiet conspiracy refined through prayer and polished smiles. I pressed the notebook to my chest, holding tight to the final words of a woman who had fought in isolation, just as I had. But unlike me, Meredith didn't survive. I stood up and placed the journal beside the stack of medical records on the table. 2 missing pieces, 2 voices long buried. Now here, tangible, undeniable. I walked toward Ellie's room. The door was slightly ajar. She was sleeping on her side, clutching her teddy bear to her chest. A faint red mark still showed on her left wrist, the same one I'd noticed a few days earlier. I sat down beside her bed and whispered like a promise. "I won't let you become another version of these old wounds. No matter who tries to stay silent, I won't be silent anymore." And for the first time in years, I believed my voice could save a child. Not for revenge, but to end a cycle of pain that had lasted far too long. I chose pale yellow tulips. Not because they were my mother's favorite, but because they had no scent. I didn't want to bring fragrance into that house, just symbolism like the smile I forced onto my face. The reconciliation dinner had been scheduled for Thursday evening in true motherly fashion. White tablecloths, matching china, and a role I was expected to perform convincingly. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a long-sleeved blouse that hid the bruises still lingering on my shoulder. Ellie sat at the table, her head bowed, hands folded neatly in her lap. My mother was plating the roast, and Derek stood pouring water from the same heavy glass pitcher I'd known since childhood, the kind with a metal lid that held heat too well. I still remembered the burn I got from it when I was 12. My mother simply looked at me and said, "Next time be more careful. Don't touch things that don't belong to you." "Oh, Quinn's here," my mother chimed, bright as fluorescent light. "Lovely flowers. Tulips, right? Put them on the windowsill." I nodded, offered a stiff smile, and walked in as if nothing had ever happened. The scent of food filled the air, mixed with something heavier, that manufactured silence only those who grew up in families like mine can recognize. I sat to the right of Ellie. She still wouldn't look at me. I gently touched her shoulder under the table, a soft brush to say, "I'm here." Derek sat across from us, smiling as if he'd never locked anyone in a freezing room. My mother ladled soup into bowls, handing mine first. "Let's hope you don't spill anything," she said with a light laugh. I didn't reply. I took the spoon and stirred gently, listening to the soft clink against the porcelain like a countdown ticking in my chest. Dinner unfolded with choreographed perfection. Derek talked about construction work, about a new contract in Las Cruces. My mother asked about my night shifts, though she didn't listen to a word I said. Ellie remained silent. I noticed she wasn't eating, just pushing vegetables to the edge of her plate. "Not hungry, sweetheart?" I asked quietly. She shook her head faintly. Derek suddenly stood. "Let me get more hot tea," he said. I saw his hand gripping the handle too tightly, and his glance toward me a little too quick. I put down my spoon. He walked behind me. I knew what was coming before I heard the bubbling sound from the kettle. Derek tilted the pitcher slightly, chuckling, "Careful now, it's hot." Then a stream of scalding water poured directly onto my thigh, searing through the thin fabric like fire on skin. I shot up, chair scraping behind me. The pain was sharp and I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood just to keep from screaming. "Oh my goodness, Quinn," my mother gasped but didn't move. "Why were you sitting so close? You know that table's small." Derek shrugged. "Slipped. Damn pitcher's handle." Ellie grabbed the edge of her chair, her eyes wide, lips pressed tight. I stood there, water dripping down my pants onto the hardwood floor, the burn rising in waves. But no one moved. No one got a towel. No one apologized. I picked up a napkin and calmly dabbed my leg. My eyes locked on Derek. "I'm fine," I said coldly. "Thanks for giving me final proof." Derek looked up, confused. "Proof of what?" I smiled faintly, placed the napkin on my plate. "You know." My mother quickly changed the subject. All right, let's not make a big deal out of this. Everyone's tired. It's probably just stress." I said nothing else. I walked straight into the kitchen, opened the freezer, pulled out a frozen bag of peas and pressed it to my leg. Every step felt like it tore something deeper. Ellie hovered at the doorway, hesitant. I looked up. "Are you okay?" She only nodded, eyes fixed on the burn. I knew she wasn't okay. I wouldn't leave her alone with that pain the way I had been. Boiling water doesn't just burn skin. It sears memory, brands silence into the flesh of a picture-perfect family mask stretched too tight. The next morning, I called my mother in a voice light enough not to raise suspicion. "Mom, I think I left my phone on the kitchen counter last night. Mind if I swing by to grab it real quick? I'll be in and out in 5 minutes." She agreed, as calm as ever. "I'm just baking bread. Come in and out, dear. I've got a meeting with the ladies' group this afternoon." I hung up without another word. My bag was already packed. A small flashlight, a phone with video recording ready, a pair of thin gloves, and most importantly, the old set of keys I'd quietly taken from the drawer when my mother stepped away from the table last night. No one noticed when I grabbed it. They never really looked at me anyway. I arrived at 10 sharp, right when my father usually walked in the backyard and my mother was elbow-deep in dough. The door was unlocked. I smiled briefly at her as I entered. "Think I left it by the toaster. I'll grab it and go." She didn't look up, just nodded. "Be careful with the cords near the mixer." I walked slowly toward the kitchen, but once past the hallway turn, I changed direction, heading straight for the small door next to the laundry room, the one that led to the basement. Still painted white, though the bottom corners were peeling. The knob stuck slightly as I turned it. I pulled out the keyring, ran my fingers along until the fourth key clicked perfectly. The lock gave way with a soft snick, almost silent. I opened the door. A rush of mildew hit me, followed by a deep, consuming chill from below. The old wooden stairs groaned under my feet, each creaking step pulling me not just downward, but backward. Into something far deeper than space. Into memory. The darkness in the basement was just as thick as it was the last time I was here, 18 years ago. Back then, I was much smaller, my arms skinny and my voice hoarse from crying. I still remember the sound of the door slamming shut, my mother's voice echoing from above. "Stay there until you learn your place." I pulled out my flashlight, sweeping it slowly around the room. The concrete walls were rough, the floor tiled with old linoleum, and the low ceiling supported by rotting wooden beams. The metallic scent of old locks still lingered. And in the far corner where the light passed over, I saw it. The small wooden chair, one leg cracked. Next to it was a piece of thin rope, frayed and half-cut, strands still scattered on the floor. I knelt down, sweeping the light across the wall behind the chair, and my chest tightened when the beam landed on a faint, carved message. "Help me, Q." I reached out and touched each letter. My fingertips were ice cold. I don't remember exactly what I used to carve it. Maybe a hairpin, maybe the edge of a broken clip. But I remember how it felt, desperate, trembling, hoping someone would one day see it. I began filming. Every corner of the room, every scratch on the wall, dried mud around the table legs, faint claw marks near the door. I moved the camera lower along the baseboard, crouching when the light reflected off something tucked inside a crack. I reached in and picked it up. A beige teddy bear, one ear torn, covered in dust. I flipped it over, and froze when I saw a dark, dried stain on the back of its thin fabric. I didn't need a lab to know what it was. I used to hold it close, bite its ear to keep from crying out when they left me down here. That blood was mine. I kept filming. This wasn't just an old room. It was the origin. The foundation of everything that followed. Proof that I wasn't making it up, not misremembering, not too sensitive like they always said. I stood there for a while, phone still in hand, head spinning from the musty air, the flood of memory, and the sensation of a thin blade cutting through the silence I'd carried for almost 2 decades. I swept the light across one last time, then shut off the camera. Everything had been captured. Every peeling corner of the wall, every scratch, and a piece of my old soul that had been buried here since 2004, now brought back to the surface. No more fuzzy memories. No more childhood imagination. I walked up the stairs, still clutching the teddy bear, and heard the door above creak open. Light from the kitchen spilled down and a familiar voice called out. "Did you find your phone?" my mother asked, her voice light as if nothing had happened. I slipped the bear into my bag, smiling as I stepped out of the darkness. His mom. Right where I left it. The ceremony was held at the town hall, the same place that had hosted weddings, school recitals, and memorials for retired veterans. That day, the chairs were lined up neatly, white cloths draped over each, with hydrangeas at every corner of the stage. A large banner hung at the back, honoring the quiet pillars of our community, mother of Allentown, Mrs. Loretta Harper. I sat 3 rows from the back, surrounded by murmurs and expectant glances waiting for my mother's speech. They called her a symbol of compassion, the woman who raised 2 lovely children, the wife of Pastor Benjamin, who passed last year to the town's collective grief. I didn't come to stop them from giving her the award. I came to end the performance. A week earlier, I had met with my private attorney, Claudia Mason, a well-known expert in abuse cases involving powerful families. I laid a folder in front of her. Inside were X-ray images of my fractured ribs when I was 17. A handwritten note, suggested abuse, unreported. A video of Derek locking Ellie in a freezing room, her sobs echoing. And an audio clip from a dinner conversation. Derek's voice snarling, "You don't want to end up like Quinn, do you?" Claudia reviewed each item silently, then looked up at me. "You've gathered what most clients take years to even remember. You have more than enough." I nodded slightly. I don't need them to pay money. I just want light to reach their basement. In front of everyone. When my mother's name was called, the applause thundered through the hall. She walked up to the podium in an ivory dress, high neckline, wearing white gloves. I knew those gloves weren't just fashion. They were her second skin, the final layer protecting the image she'd built for over 30 years. He thanked everyone. Thanked the town. Thanked those who always believed in the values of traditional family. And just as she was about to close with a tribute to my father, I stood up. "Excuse me," I said. "May I say a few words?" The entire hall turned to look. My mother hesitated for a second, then offered a faint smile. "She's my daughter," she told the audience like a light-hearted explanation. "Sometimes she wants to chime in." I walked up, clutching my small bag, stood next to the podium and looked out across the crowd. Familiar faces. Old neighbors, former teachers, the grocery clerk down the street, the deputy mayor's wife, the man who used to pat my head when I was 6. I took a deep breath. "My name is Quinn Harper. I'm a night shift nurse at St. Mercy Hospital. And I am the daughter of the woman receiving this award." A ripple of whispers. "I'm not here to dispute her award. I'm here to add a part of the story the program didn't have time to print." I pulled out my phone, connected it to the HDMI cable I'd set up earlier. The screen behind the stage lit up. A video began playing. A low-angle shot, dim light but clear enough. Ellie trembling against the wall, Derek leaning in close, shouting, "You don't want to be treated like Quinn, do you?" Followed by the sound of a door slamming, crying fading, and a lock clicking. Silence swept the room. Then I played a short audio clip. My voice asking, "Did she really need to be locked up?" And my mother's voice responding slowly, calmly, "She needs discipline. You learn that way too, remember." When the screen went dark, I looked out at the crowd. I'm not sharing this for pity. I'm sharing it so anyone who's been silent like me knows they're not crazy, not weak, and not wrong for feeling pain. Some chairs shifted. A man stood up. I recognized him, Jackson, now retired. He hesitated. "Miss Quinn." I handled those x-rays back then. I remember writing a follow-up for suspected abuse. But the file was pulled for review and never came back. A woman stood next. I was Quinn's third-grade teacher. I asked her mother once why she always came in with red eyes. Mrs. Loretta said the child just had bad sleep habits. I'm sorry I believed her. Another man, Mr. Harris, the neighbor next door, stood voice gravelly. Every Saturday night I heard shouting from the pastor's house. I thought the kids were being rowdy. But no. I remember that didn't sound like kids playing. It sounded like pain, and someone trying not to scream. I didn't say another word. I just looked at my mother. She was still standing there, fists clenched around those white gloves. Her face couldn't hold the smile anymore. Her eyes darted through the crowd, searching for an exit, someone to defend her, a hint of denial. But everyone had turned to face me. No one spoke on her behalf. And she knew, silence no longer belonged to me. It had returned and wrapped itself around her. When the police car pulled up in front of the town hall, the red and blue lights reflected off the large glass pane behind the podium. People stepped aside. No one spoke. No one laughed anymore. The applause from half an hour earlier had turned into a heavy silence, as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see how far the truth would reach. My mother stood frozen, her white gloves damp with sweat, while Derek's face tightened, eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. But neither of them said a word as two officers stepped onto the stage and held out the arrest warrants. Loretta Harper and Derek Harper, the officer announced clearly. By order of the county police, you are being placed under arrest for charges including child abuse, falsifying and destroying medical records, witness intimidation and obstruction of federally mandated reporting. I stood behind the last row of seats, my hand gripping the strap of my purse, eyes fixed on Ellie, who stood near the side exit. She clung to my arm like she feared someone might take her away if she let go. I bent down and held her hand, it was ice cold. My mother was handcuffed in the front. She turned back to the crowd, her eyes still trying to cling to some shred of pride. We were only raising our children the best way we knew how, she said softly, just loud enough for the mic to catch. It's all just a misunderstanding. But no one nodded. No one agreed. Phones continued to rise, recording. A young woman, a reporter from the local station, pushed closer to me as people began filing out of the room. Her voice was gentle but careful. Miss Quinn, if I may ask, why now? Why are you speaking up only now? Is it because of Ellie? I looked up at her, then straight into the camera being adjusted behind her. Because no one ever asked if I was okay, I said slowly. They just called me dramatic. That answer wasn't meant to place blame. It was simply the truth. A truth so plain, so quiet that most had overlooked it. That evening, Ellie was placed into temporary housing at the town's Child Protective Center. I went with her, the paperwork listing me as her emergency guardian. The social worker, Carol, a kind woman with silver hair, looked at me warmly as she handed Ellie over to me in the center's small living room. This girl needs someone she can trust, Carol said. And after everything, it's clear that person is you. On the ride home, Ellie sat in the passenger seat, clutching the new teddy bear she'd been given, eyes never leaving the window. A light rain had begun. I kept the radio low. Neither of us spoke the entire way. When I turned off the engine and pulled out the keys, Ellie turned to me. Her eyes were a little swollen. Her voice barely a whisper. This time, am I gonna be locked in again? I turned fully toward her and placed my hand gently over hers. No, Ellie. You will never again know what it feels like to be locked in from the outside. She looked at me for a few more seconds, then gave a small nod. I watched her little body sink into relief, like something in her chest had just let go. Back at the apartment, I wrapped Ellie in a soft blanket and set her on the sofa, pouring her a mug of hot cocoa. Under the warm yellow glow of the living room light, her face looked a little less tense. I placed the thick file on the table. Official paperwork from Attorney Claudia. Our petition for full guardianship was ready, including all supporting documents, medical reports, and voluntary statements from neighbors and teachers. That night, Ellie slept in my room, hugging a plush pillow like it was her last line of defense. I didn't leave. I sat beside her, listening to every breath, every little turn under the covers. Not because I was afraid someone would come to take her, but because I knew some nights are so long, Even silence can make a child curl up in fear. I set my alarm for the next day, the formal court appointment to begin the permanent guardianship process. In my drawer, I had already tucked away Meredith's old journal, along with the page she'd once written, "If anything happens to me, don't leave the girl with them." It was no longer a dying wish. Now it was a compass for everything I was about to do. When I turned off the light and sat in the dark, with only a sliver of streetlight reaching in through the window, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I just felt like I had finally pulled a child away from the same hands I had once escaped. And I hadn't walked away alone. I had held on to a small hand and I hadn't let go. My new apartment was on the third floor of a quiet red brick building in the suburbs of Santa Fe. The living room window faced east, and every morning, sunlight streamed across the little bookshelf in the corner. I didn't choose this place for the price. I chose it because it had no memories. No dark rooms. No hallway where I once trembled. No doors that locked from the outside. Ellie had her own room, painted in soft blue with decals of clouds and moons on the wall. On her desk sat a bunny-shaped touch lamp she picked out herself, and a small frame with a picture of the two of us laughing in front of a used bookstore at the end of the street. On our first morning in the apartment, I made tea. 2 porcelain cups sat side by side on the wooden table. One brand new with a silver rim and the other, chipped slightly at the handle, was the one I brought from my parents' house. I used it every night back then. It had a fine crack along its side, the one I'd been blamed for breaking. But I kept it as a reminder. Some cracks don't ruin you. They just make you more real. Ellie stepped out of her room, her hair still messy, wearing her kitten print pajamas. She sat down across from me, wrapping her hands around her new cup, and asked softly, "Can I keep this cup forever?" "For as long as you want it," I replied with a smile. "It's yours now." We sat in silence for a moment, the steam from the tea drifting between us. Outside the window, sunlight slowly spilled onto the small balcony. I felt a calm settling in my chest. On the table next to the folder I was preparing to send to my attorney, sat a brand new brown leather notebook. I titled it, "The Things I Was Taught Not to Say." I opened to the first page and wrote in black ink, "No one ever hit me hard enough to kill me, but hard enough to silence me." I chose to break that silence so a child wouldn't have to live the fear I did. I paused, looking at the fresh ink, then continued, "I used to think blood created legacy. But now I understand, it's how we stop old wounds from spreading into the next generation. My legacy isn't hidden pain. It's truth spoken out loud." Next week, I would be launching an organization called Project Open Door, a project I built with Claudia and a team of experts. The goal is to support children living in powerful families, where influence, reputation, or religion have been used to silence the truth. Our small office is on the second floor of a community library. No flashy signs, just one simple line etched into the glass door. "You don't need to scream to be believed. We hear even your whispers." We have 3 full-time staff members, a psychologist, a social worker, and a young attorney working part-time. Since my story aired on local television, we've received at least 2 calls a week from different parts of the state. Many from parents, some from teachers, and sometimes from the kids themselves. Ellie sat behind me during a recent online meeting, doodling on paper but occasionally looking up to listen. After the call ended, she asked, "That girl, was she like me?" I brushed her hair gently. "In some ways. But you have something she didn't." "What's that?" "Grown-ups who didn't walk away." Ellie nodded thoughtfully, then whispered to herself, "I'm gonna be a good big sister to kids like that someday." I laughed. "Then let's open that door together." It came out naturally, but later I used it as the slogan for Project Open Door's first campaign. The first door is believing a child. That night, after Ellie went to sleep, I reorganized the bookshelf and pulled out the old wooden box where I had once stored the first pieces of evidence. Photos of a teddy bear, footage from a mini camera, Meredith's journal, printed medical records. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Those things were no longer what I used to protect myself. Now I write forward. And what I write isn't memory, it's direction. It's how I keep old wounds from becoming chains, and instead turn them into lanterns placed at the doorstep of another child, helping them see that somewhere out there, someone is waiting with the door open. I placed 2 teacups on the shelf, Ellie's new one and my old, cracked one. They stood side by side, not needing to match, only needing to exist together. One whole, one once broken, and both worth keeping. I looked at them for a long time, then blew out the candle beside them. That night, I didn't write anything else in the journal. I simply closed it and told myself, sometimes the strongest legacy we can leave behind is the silence we dared to break. What would you do if a child in your own family whispered something adults had spent years trying to hide? Do you believe silence protects reputations, or that speaking up is the only way to protect the future? I don't share this story to ask for pity. I share it because I believe somewhere out there are still children like Ellie, waiting for someone to really look, really listen, and stand for them. If this story made you think, if it stirred something that's been hidden in silence, I hope you'll leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, because maybe your words will be the first open door someone needs to step into the light. And if you're drawn to real stories, honest moments about family, healing, and how we overcome pain to find ourselves again, please subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told. Not out of bitterness, but with the courage to face the past and forgive it, including ourselves.